Can you take away the
Yep,
image?
going down.
Thank you.
You're
Hi,
welcome.
hi, everyone. It's so nice to be with you on a very cold night. It's nice to have some friends to spend some time with. Tonight is going to be a little different from the previous ones. Session one, we talked about Yosef interpreting his own dreams. And session two is about Yosef and Yehuda. Tonight's session I've titled rather pompously, because I couldn't come up with anything else, Yosef's Heart. And it has three parts. And at the end of each part, I'm hoping that you will chime in. It's a hard thing to do on Zoom, but I never feel good when I've talked from A to Z and no one else has participated. So the three themes that I hope we'll discuss tonight are recognition, the Hebrew word lahakir, hakara, and the second is Yosef's tears, and the third is the second dream realized, which I promised last week. So let's start with the recognition theme. And whoops, my pages are stuck together.
Before you start, can I just ask that everybody mute unless they have something to say? Then unmute.
Okay. Right, but don't be shy about unmuting. But anyhow, at the end of each section, I'm really going to invite you to participate. So I'm going to share the screen with you now. I know that what you see at first is only in the bottom half of the screen, but it's a strategy. So here we have in Vayeshev, the brothers send the bloody coat ahead of them. Notice that they send it, and they, in other words, they give their father a chance to see it at first, not in their presence. And then they arrive and they say, Vayomru, Zot matzanu hakerna, haketonet bincha hi imlo. Shockingly coarse and incredibly brief, three little blurted sentences. Zot matzanu, we found this. Hakerna, identify it, please. And haketonet bincha hi imlo. Is it your son's garment or not? Your son, not Yosef, not our brother, your son. And Yaakov vayakira, he does recognize it, he identifies it. Vayomer, also in three short bursts. Ketonet bini, it is my son's garment. Chaya ra'a achalatu, a wild animal has surely eaten him. Tarof toraf Yosef. Yosef is torn to bits. And the brothers never need to tell the story they planned. Their false evidence is so effective that he jumps to the conclusion that they want him to jump to. And so our first example of the word lehakir is it's a physical item. Do you recognize this? Of course, Yaakov does. So now I'm going to show you the bottom half of the page. And here, so, and here we have Yehuda being asked lehakir, again, physical object, although in his case it's physical objects. And he also will identify, but it's a different kind of identifying. I'm not going to recount the whole Yehuda and Tamar story, but I think you know that in order to come into Tamar, Yehuda gave three items as an eravon, as a guarantee that he would pay up for his time with the woman he thought was a prostitute. And they were Mater, Chotemet, and Ptilim. His stick, his seal ring, and Ptilim, all sorts of different opinions. The most common one recently in historically right things is the string on which you could carry a signet ring. But I still like the one Ptilim, literally his threads. So some sort of garment he was wearing. She suggests those three items, not he, but it sounds like these are things that every man has on him. He offers them. And of course, when he comes, he doesn't come. When he sends a servant to pay, she's not there. Now the word comes to him that his daughter-in-law is pregnant, and he must have been feeling, yes, I waited it out and I won, because I gave her my first son. The son died. The Torah says because he was an evil man, but Yehuda knows, I gave my son to this woman, he died. Now, according to the rules of Yibum, I give my second son, Onan, he died. According to the rules of Yibum, she's entitled to Shelah, no way. But he also doesn't want to do the socially unacceptable thing and say, we're not going to give you Yibum. We're going to free you from the family to remarry by chalitza or whatever ceremony they had then. Instead, he decides to take the wait her out approach, sends her back to her father, which really she now belongs to Yehuda's family, but the father takes her in and waits and waits. We all know that Tamar was proactive and tricked Yehuda into making her pregnant, but Yehuda does not know this. So when the news comes to him that your daughter-in-law is pregnant, he's great. He's very happy because now he can put her to death and Shelah's free of her. To him, she has to be a witch of some sort. And he's very specific about the punishment, which fits with a lot of English literature, witch stories. Hotziuha v'salfuha, take her out and burn her. And so they come and they get her to bring her to trial. And she sends some evidence ahead of her, right? Just as the brothers sent the coat ahead. She sends her evidence. She's going to go right behind the evidence. And Lamor, in the light blue now, Laisha shel ele lo anochi hava. The owner of these things, he's the man who made me pregnant. And she says, it seems then in his presence, possibly only a message, Hakerna lemi hachotemet v'haptilim v'hamata ha'ele. Please identify who is the owner of this signet ring, of this whatever ptilim is, threads, and this staff. Vayaker Yehuda. And Yehuda identifies it. He has a lot of incentive not to. It's clear that the head of the tribe or the clan at that time was the judge. Of course, both he and Tamar know whose it is, but all he has to say is, good, I'll get right on it. I'll punish the man and put her to death. Instead, he steps up, Vayaker Yehuda. Yehuda identifies it. Vayomer, those beautiful words, tzadka mimeni. She's more of a tzaddik than I, right? She's more right than I. Neither of them is totally in the right, right? Tricking someone in that way is not acceptable behavior, but she has justification that I don't have. She knew she was entitled to my yibum. She claimed it in a deceitful way. I was stam going to a prostitute. And ki al kain lo natatiha l'Shela b'ni. Her justification was, I just wouldn't give her Shela. V'lo yasaf od l'data. And he didn't continue to know her, right? Another word that's the same as lakir, but in the Torah it also means have sexual relations. So that his knowing is more than knowing. It's clear what she is demanding, that he acknowledge that it's his son, and to some degree that it's his sin. And he does acknowledge it, a kind of a vidui. In a way, he asks mechila from her by saying tzadka mimeni, and he also does an act of contrition, an act of teshuva, which is she will be his wife, but he'll never lie with her again. And this union will produce Peretz and Zarach, in a sense, the two boys to replace the two who are lost. And also the two lines that are going to have a struggle of where will the kingship come from. So it's obvious why Tamar is asking for him to identify, although she's incredibly confident in her assessment of him. She knows him good and bad. So she knows that he's the kind of guy who's going to stop by a prostitute. And she also seems to know he's a man with a conscience. He won't tell a bald-faced lie. And she stakes everything on his stepping up, which he does. And I'm sure many of you have heard how so many of the commentators say, this was Yehuda's last chance to reclaim the kingship. And she asked for his stick, his seal ring, and his threads. It was like asking for the king's seal ring, you know, the one that Haman was so into, and the king's staff and the king's robe. Had he not identified it, he would have forfeited the kingship. Kings can do bad, but they must confess. When truth is told to power, power has to respond. And that's of course a very repeated pattern in the tribe of Yehuda, but this is the first episode like that. So I get why she wanted him to identify the evidence, but I have a lot of trouble understanding why the brothers brought their father the bloody ketonet. Why acknowledge at all that they saw Yosef? Why not let it be that he went away and he never came back? You sent him to Shem, Abba? Oh, yeah, we weren't in Shem. We didn't see him. It's a dynamic which I've wondered about for a long time, is that they wanted to see his moment of grief for Yosef, is that they thought when they brought it, it would be a moment when he would turn to them, which of course he doesn't. Is it that by somehow it's because it's the ketonet that it's important to bring it? But as if that ketonet could now be given to someone else if Yosef's out of the way. So before I open the floor, I just want to show you my third lahakir text. And that is, of course, when Yosef recognizes his brothers, the section we've referred to many times, so I'm just going to fly through it. Vayavo achei Yosef vayishtachavu lo apayim arza, vayar Yosef et echav vayakirem. When the brothers were bowing before him to buy food, Yosef saw his brothers and he recognized them. Vayitnaker alehem vayedaber itam kashot. And he made himself like a stranger to them and spoke roughly to them. And Vayitnaker, in many views, like in the Concordance and Al HaTorah, is the same shoresh as Lahakir. Vayomer Alehem Me'ayin Batem, and he says, where are you from? Vayomru Me'eretz Canaan Lishbo Ochel. We come from Canaan to buy food. Vayaker Yosef et Echav. Yosef recognized his brothers, Vehem lo hikiruhu, and they didn't recognize him. And of course, that evolution from he recognizes them to he recognizes his brothers, although it always, even before that, it says his brothers. And there are all sorts of simple comments, first by sight, then by hearing their voices. That's why I asked a question. But the important ending is, Vayakel Yosef et Echav vehem lo hikiruhu. They didn't identify him. And then you come to my favorite pasuk, Vayiskol Yosef. Just before we continue on this page, I want to back up to the preceding one. And you'll now see that all three of our little vignettes, I had to print it too small to put it on a single page, involve a challenge to recognize, recognizing, and possibly a reference to Yosef. There's no doubt that when Yaakov finishes, he says, Tarov Toraf Yosef. In case of Yehuda, it's not a direct reference to Yosef, but it says, Lo Yasaf Od Ladata. He didn't continue to sleep with her. And Yasaf, Yosef, is the same shoresh. And to me, that rings really true because the parallel that we see, it can't be that Yehuda didn't experience himself. He was there and said, Hakerna. And now in his life, someone says, Hakerna. And perhaps that was part of why he felt compelled to answer honestly. And of course, here again, we have Lahakir, and a mention of Yosef. To me, it might be a little forced, but it's like a good pointer that the story of Yosef revolves around this issue of Lahakir. And Rashi makes a comment on this third little vignette. And his question is, how could it be that he identified them and they didn't identify him? And of course, there are all sorts of reasons, practical reasons. He was dressed as an Egyptian. He spoke Egyptian. The one that the kids always like is he wasn't yet bearded when he left. They were bearded because they were a little older. A beard changes how your face looks. But the one I wanted to bring tonight, which Rashi quotes from Midrash Rabbah, which I bolded, is Umidrash Agada. Vayaker Yosef et Echav. Yosef recognized his brothers. Keshenim Suru biyado. Hikir shehem Echav v'richem alehem. When they were given into his power, right, and he could avenge himself, he recognized that these are his brothers. Vayaker Yosef et Echav v'richem alehem, and he took pity on them. Vehem lo hikiruhu, but they didn't recognize him back in Dotan. Keshenafal biyadam linhog bo achava. When he fell into their power, they did not treat him with brotherly love. And of course, even when they're not hurting him, Yosef is much, much, much earlier to the table to fully recognize them as his brother than they are to fully recognize him as their brother. I think I said it wrong. He fully recognizes that they're his brothers, but there are elements of it. For example, their first time to Egypt, they say there are 12 of us, so they're conscious of him. but they don't seem to put him totally in the category of the other brothers. Possibly they never do. We'll talk about it later tonight. But if they do, it's very, very close to the end of Sefer Bereshit, like within a matter of psukim from the end. Now let's sort of open the topic of lehakir. Let me stop sharing so we can see each other. Go
I'd like
ahead,
to make a
Sarah.
comment.
How are you? Sarah Barber. Are you raising your hand? You're such
Yes,
a
I
good
am.
student, Sarah. You're very well behaved in class.
Yeah, they taught me not to call out. So it
Your
seems to me
grandson too. I taught
there
Sarah's
was-
grandson.
yeah, thank you. That there's the word vayakir it's sort of like that. I think to myself that Abraham recognized Yitzchak and went with him to the Akedah and took him as a Na'ar. He acknowledged him. And Yitzchak acknowledged Yaakov and Esav. He liked what Esav cooked. He wanted Yaakov to be the Talmid Chacham. In my mind, when I read about Yaakov, it was like he had these boys go out, have a good time, you 12 brothers. It doesn't seem to me, Shahu Hikir Otam, as individuals. He had them in a group, and you don't hear about dialogue between them or relationships the same way as the other two avot. And so the only one that he recognized was Yosef, and they were like giving him this dig. You recognize Yosef, but the rest of us seem to be minor. We never got your eye. We never got your attention.
That's interesting. At the end, of course, they accept that. You don't really see interaction between Avram and Yitzchak except for the Akedah, which is a big one. But to recognize someone as a korban doesn't seem like fatherly. But there's some flaw in this area of recognition in Yaakov's household. That's for sure. Thank you. Jeff, are you raising your hand? Go ahead.
Yeah, yes. I wanted to say that when the brothers send in advance the Ketana Tapasim, and they say, do you recognize this? The duplicity in that is so overwhelming. But they've used it as proof positive for themselves that he bloodied, that he will never return. He will never be part of their lives. Thank God. We've handled that. But and it's also not only for themselves, but also I think it's like a punishment for their father, who favored Joseph, and they were going to show, they showed no compassion for him. For Yaakov at that moment. And we know that later on, we know that for years he wept over Joseph. But the brothers were totally ignored that. They totally ignored that. That was the one thing. And then because Yehuda was so duplicitous, it's that when he heard from Tamar those words, it's not that he's without conscience. He's very much with conscience. I mean, or at least they developed that. And those words like haunted him, and he remembered them. And of course, he came forward as righteous, and acknowledged things. That's what I have to say.
Right. But of course, what you just said, Jeff, fits really well with the view that the brothers did not actually sell Yosef. That we're not going to do that in this class, but those of you who are familiar know that although the brothers planned to sell Yosef to the Ishmaelim, it's not clear if they did or if someone went by and kidnapped him. And seeing the bloody ketona might be sort of, we don't even have the body to bring, but it might be evidence of their belief that he really is dead.
Proof positive.
And in that case, stepping forward wasn't stepping forward and saying, okay, he's safe in Mitzrayim. It's stepping forward and saying we murdered him takes more. But I like to think that they sold him. But you know, it's a whole topic that's interesting and affects what's on their mind. Go ahead, Richard. You need to
So I
unmute.
had a thought about the katana too, maybe a little made out of whole cloth, no pun intended, but
We don't
but
object to
but
made
they
out of
really
whole-
they really had murder on their minds initially. When they threw him in the pit, they thought they're very likely to murder him, and so they were filled with this rage. And in the end, all they could take it out on was the katana. And by stabbing it or doing whatever I mean, they didn't stab it, but, you know, to having the effect of it
Right.
was a way of doing violence to him symbolically.
Oh,
So-
that's beautiful. But they wanted the father to see the evidence of their violence?
Well, no, they had, I mean, once they had it, they had to deal with it. But I don't think they were so much in control. I think that this was such rage, such murderous rage, that they had to pursue that path. And then maybe, in a way, they were kind of confessing without actually confessing, by bringing it to him and showing him. They had to, you know, I mean, murderers sometimes do this sort of thing. It's hard to make them out to be total murderers because you know, they're the Avos after all. But they at that moment, there was a rage that, I mean, that's the whole point of the story at that juncture.
Right. It's a beautiful idea, which I never thought of. Ellie Tonkin, here's my sister in Brookline, Mass.
I was thinking about what you said about Tamar recognizing in Yehuda his different layers of capacity to be good and capacity to do the wrong thing, and how her strategy challenged him to choose who he was and gave him another opportunity to do the right thing. And I was thinking about how in the discussion right before you began the shiur, people were talking about whether FDR ultimately gets credit for doing the right thing, or if even, you know, all the good his wife did, he counterbalanced by doing the wrong thing. But maybe one possibility is that Eleanor sort of dared him to do the right thing and allowed him to.
That's great, Ellie. And you know, I heard something on NPR this week about the relationship between them. And she was writing a column in a newspaper at one time, and she often disagreed with his policies. And once she knew she was going really far in opposing him, and she said, "Is it okay with you?" And he said, do it. I'll handle the party. Go ahead." So it's like, I've got different things pulling on me, but I want you to be one of the pulls, I think is what he was saying.
Yeah, I heard that also.
Yeah. Well, women outsiders very, very often can, in the Tanakh, bring out the best in men with unfulfilled potential, right? If you think of Ruth and Boaz, and you know, Rachav and the Meraglim, it is a pattern. Maybe in our lives also, who knows? Richard, you're holding something up for us to see, or it just happens to be in your hand?
Yes, I just wanted people to know it's a wonderful read. It's an old collection, but you can get it easily. My Day were her columns. I'm very much not a young guy, and I remember back as a kid, even then, reading, I think it must have been in the Post, her daily columns, because she just really, in my family, the Roosevelts their pictures were on the mantle. And so this is a collection of her columns from 1936 to 1962. It's called My Day. Yeah, My Day.
Oh, that's great. I wish my dad were around to get it for him as a Hanukkah present. That's great. Oh, Ellie, go ahead.
I had one other thought about the idea of recognition and Joseph recognizing his brothers, but his brothers not recognizing him.
Yeah.
And I was thinking about the idea of how when you're apart from someone, or if you've lost someone, and you have all this time to recognize them differently or recognize different things in them, that I was imagining that these brothers have been apart for so long that they may have had differing abilities or timing of their abilities to see each other and to recognize each other
Right.
in fresh or truer ways.
Right.
And maybe that was a reference to that.
Yeah. The meeting of Yaakov and Esav has something of that in it too. So let's go to, I mean, in English, of course, it comes out different, identifies, acknowledges, recognizes, but the Torah sees it as a single thing, and which we'll come back to later. That's why I'm going to leave that. So now, Yosef is the cryingest person in the Torah. Crying when someone dies, so that's written about many people. But for Yosef, here are all the times that he cried. He cries when he has just thrown his brothers into jail as part of his test, and they think he doesn't understand Hebrew. And talking together, the brothers say, you know, we've been telling this guy we're innocent, and we are, we're not spies. אבל אשמים אנחנו על אחינו, אשר ראינו את צרת נפשו והתחננו אלינו, ולא שמענו. We are guilty about our brother, that we saw his suffering when he was pleading with us, and we would not listen. The theme in this passage is listening. Right? They are feeling that they are now in the position that Yosef was in. They're desperate for help and there's no response. And even though it's 20 years later, they've carried the guilt enough to say, here comes the punishment. Al kain ba'aleinu hatzara hazot. That's why we're in this situation. Vayan Ruvain otam. And Ruvain answered them. לאמור, הלא אמרתי עליכם לאמור, אל תחתו בילד ולא שמעתם, וגם דמו הנה נדרש. It's not only his cries that you didn't listen to, you didn't listen to me. And now we have to pay for his blood. So there's no question, Ruvain believes that when he stepped away from the pit, they took him out and murdered him. And they never forget about not comforting Yaakov. They never comforted Reuven and said, you know, we sold him. He's not coming home again, but he's not dead, which strengthens the view that even the brothers thought he was dead. But Yosef, not only did they not know that Yosef heard them, right? Lo yadu ki shomea Yosef ki amelitz beinotam, because he always used a translator with them. Yosef, for the first time, heard that one brother stood up for him. And one brother stepping up, of course, is all the difference, because he thought they were all against him, and maybe even Abba, who scolded him and sent him off to Shem. And so he turns from them and he cries. Those are his first tears. His second tears are when he's demanded that they bring Binyamin, and he sees Binyamin and he runs from the room and cries. The next time he cries is, of course, the magnificent scene where Yehuda offers to stay as a slave instead of Binyamin. Below Yachol Yosef litapek l'chol hanitzavim, and Yosef can't control himself in front of the people. He could run to the room, but he doesn't want to. He's decided this is the moment of confession. Vayikra hotziu kol ish mipanai, and he says, get everyone, me'alai, get everyone out of here. Below amad ish ito, and no one except his brothers. This man who always had an entourage is finally alone with the brothers. Below amad ish ito behitvada, different from lahakir, but clearly not in a sexual sense. Behitvada Yosef, when he made himself known to his brothers, vayitain et kolo bivchi, and he wailed and he said, Ani Yosef, right? That his tears are related to this issue of recognition, which you all said rightly. Sarah started with not recognizing that they're individuals, right? And the process of uncovering the members of your family as the individuals they are. This is often what brings them to tears, because in families, we have all sorts of assumptions about each other. And especially with Binyamin, it's pure love and guilt that makes him cry, that he's using Binyamin as the bait. But with Reuven and Yehuda, it's that he thought that these sons of Leah who despised him were bad men, and he sees they're great men, right? And then, of course, Yosef and Yaakov cry together at their reunion, and Yosef cries when Yaakov dies. That's to be expected. And his last tears are simply heartbreaking. After the brothers have gotten permission, and it wasn't easy to bury Yaakov in Marat HaMachpelah, and they've gone together under armed guard because Paro wants them to come back to bury their father. They've had the experience of mourning their father together, and they come back to Egypt, and Yosef thinks, I am finally one of them, right? And then this is what happens. The brothers say, now that father's gone, he's gonna take revenge, right? He's like Esav, who said, when my father dies, I kill Yaakov. That's what he's gonna do to us. He didn't want to hurt Yaakov. And so they send a message to Yosef. Vayitzavu el Yosef lemor. Avicha tziva lifnei moto lemor. So they don't go, right? Just like sending the bloody ketona, just like sending the stick in the ring and the threads. They send this message to Yosef. Ko tomru avicha tziva lifnei moto. Your father declared before his death, commanded, Ko tomru Yosef. Say these words to Yosef when I'm gone. Ana sana pesha achecha v'chatatam, right? Sounds like Yom Kippur. Please, 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 please forgive the sins of your brothers. Ki ra'ag malucha, because they did evil to you. Ve'ata sana repeated pesha avdei elokei avicha. And now forgive the sin of the servants of the God of your father. It's like the father is saying, forgive your brothers because they were bad and they weren't God-fearing, but now they fear my God, and please forgive them. And of course, Vayevek Yosef, and Yosef cried. And it's right, for the guy who said, Et achai anochi mevakesh, I seek my brothers, when he was 17 years old. Now when his father has died, and I didn't do the math, so I think he's 69, but I'm not sure. After all these years and everything that's gone on, they still fear him, and he feels either way it's a disaster. If they're lying, they never learn to trust him. right? Any of us could cry just hearing a message from the grave of the loved one. But here it's more. If they're lying, they don't trust me. And if they're telling the truth and they confess to Father, why did I sacrifice myself all these years? I never allowed myself to tell him what happened. I never allowed us to be together because I didn't want to lie to him. And if he asked me, how did I get here? I never wanted to tell out of love for them. And now they didn't, it's so tragic. They didn't recognize what I was trying to do for them. And they confessed unnecessarily. So they lost the Father's respect, no matter what the message is. And I lost closeness with my Father. And and those are his final tears that, you know, in the Torah right before he dies. But of course, it's years pass in between. At the end of that passage, he tells them, "Hatachat Elokim ano?" Do you think I'm God? I think what you did worked out fine. If you have to do some sort of tshuva, take it up with God. You can trust me. I will always provide for you. Anochi achalkel etchem. And in some strange way, we're back in the first dream. He is the provider. Now, you can stay here and you're under my protection. And I will provide for you always. And finally, Vayedaber el libam. He spoke to their hearts. They finally kind of exposed their fear, and he was able to comfort them. His comforting is exactly what he said when he first revealed himself, which is God sent me to save lives and all that. But they weren't ready to hear it yet. There's something about the parent dying that for all of us who've experienced it, no, it's a shift of the whole reality, right? And you and your siblings, it's different now. There's no question about it. So since the time is going down, I'm not going to invite your comments on the tears alone. I'm going to go to our last section and then we'll talk about them both together. And our last section is the second dream realized, the dream of the sun and the moon and the stars. I'm going to share with you. And one second. And of course, the question about these dreams, the second dream is, when does it come true? When do the 11 brothers and the sun, which is clearly Yaakov, and the moon, which is clearly Rachel, when do they bow down to Yosef? And so I brought you three situations. The first and the second, Yaakov isn't physically present, but he is present, right? In the first, when Yosef comes home and the men have been brought to the house and they have a gift from him, that gift is from Yaakov. Yaakov said, bring a gift to that Egyptian and let's hope it was all a mistake that the money came back. Bring back the gift and bring back the money, bring this very precious gift and bring it. So they prepare the gift, and when Yosef comes home, it says in the blue with the red writing, Vayishtachavu lo, so they bowed before him to the ground. And what's it? The brothers are in front of him, the same 10 as before. And then what does he talk about? As if it's casual chit chat. Hashalom avichem hazaken asher amartem haodenu chai. Everything okay with your old father that you mentioned? Is he still alive? We know he'll ask it later, ha'od avichai, but he already is obsessed with this question. And the brothers answer, Shalom lavdecha lavinu, odenu chai. So the conversation is about their father. and the gift is from their father. Vayikdu vayishtachavu. They bow the head and they bow the body, and he looks up and there's Binyamin. Now he has the 11 stars, all the brothers bowing to him, and Yaakov is part of the story. The next episode is similar, except it's really like a message from Yaakov. It's the passage I just read to you. When the message is sent, here are the words of your father, and then, which I didn't continue earlier, when they come to him, before he says, stop being so afraid of me, they come, vayiplu lefanav, they fall before him, and they say, we're your slaves. It's like saying, we'll take the punishment. It may be something like, don't hurt our children. They're so terrified of him. And so Yaakov is present there because it is, or supposedly is, his request. But what about Yaakov physically himself bowing down? So he does, but not in the presence of the other brothers. He bows down when he asks Yosef to arrange his burial in Marat HaMachpelah. And there it says, Vayishtachu Yisrael al Rosh Hamita. He's sick in bed, but somehow, however you can bow in bed, he bows to his son. So that seems to be that dream came true, but what about Rachel? Where is she in this story? So I told you before that I feel very strongly that a boy of 8 or 9 or 10, that was his age, who lost his mother's always, right, in every dream. When he's scared, he thinks of her. When he has something, a triumph to share, he misses her. And to me, there's nothing surprising about his not being there. But my granddaughter, Eliana, sent me this poem. Right before COVID, my Israeli kids bought me a gift, which is a 2-volume set of modern Israeli literature that responds to the Bible and references biblical language. And it was going to be perfect for these classes. And my son travels regularly for business to America, and he would bring it. I still don't have it. But now and then I send her to the book to look things up. And she sent me this poem about Yosef. It is in Hebrew. I know many of you know Hebrew, but well enough to understand it. Some don't. So if it's okay and you have the patience, I'll read it whole paragraphs and translate. And then at the end, if you want to hear the whole thing put together, it's very short. I'll do that. So it's by Aryeh Sivan, about whom I know nothing. And so I don't know when it was written because I don't have the book to look it up. And the title of the book is a play on the name Yosef. It has the word nosaf, additional. Mashahu nosaf b'yachas liYosef. Something more about Yosef. Behinaflo labol yada kidmeit, ube'emet ein letzapot sheyeled cholamini kazeh yichyeh אחרי נופלו לבאר שאין בה מים. רק בחלומו אדם נופל לבארות וקם. When he fell into the pit, he knew he was dying. And in truth, one can't expect that a dreamer boy like that will live after his fall into a pit that doesn't have water in it. Only in his dreams can men fall into pits and survive. Now, the next the next stanza is a play on what we talked about, the word hakir, lahakir, to know. Uvahakara gmura, belev naki meira, הכין עצמו לרדת בספינת המוות, שתפליג עמו על פני המים השחורים, המים הקושרים את תחתיות הבארות אל מקומות עמו. And with perfect knowledge, with perfect understanding or awareness, and with a pure heart, he prepared himself to go down to the boat of death that would sail him across the black waters, the waters that connect the sources of wells to his mother, right? This poem says, dying for a boy who's lost his mother is different for another boy. As he's falling, he thinks he's dying, and he also thinks he's on his way to Rachel. Ach, bamakom hahu, bimkom lahardimo benevel halavan, achaza be'evarav, isha chaya me'od, beyad tovaat, v'hasof hazeh, V'hayosef hazeh hatam niskak levor nosaf, all these plays on Yosef, v'legvarim ha'asurim b'chdei ladat איך באמת נראה אדם שבא בחלומו המוות. So he thinks he's on his way to his mother, and he gets to that place. Ach b'makom hahu, but in that place, Bimkom, play on words, lahardimo, benevel halavan, instead of soothing him to sleep with her white lyre, achaza ve'evarav isha chaya ma'od, a lively, playing on the beginning of Parshat Shemot, a lively woman, a very powerful woman, claims his limbs, right, and saves his life. But V'hayosef hazeh hatam nizkak levor nosaf. So this naive Yosef will need another pit, the jail, right? L'gvarim ha'asurim, one for imprisoned men, so that he'll understand really how it looks that a man comes to death in his dream, right? That's Sar HaOfim. I think it's a great poem. I never heard of it before. You want to hear it quick, uninterrupted? Yes or no?
Yes.
Want?
Yes.
Yes, okay.
Yes.
והנפלו לבו ידע כי מת, ובאמת אין לצפות שילד חולמני כזה יחיה אחרי נפלו לבאר שאין בה מים. רק בחלומו אדם נופל לבארות וקם. בהכרה גמורה בלב נקי מרע, הכין עצמו לרדת בספינת המוות, שתפליג עמו על פני המים השחורים. המים הקושרים את תחתיות הבארות אל מקומות עמו. אך במקום ההוא, במקום להרדימו בנבל הלבן, אחזה באיבריו אישה חיה מאוד, ביד טובעת, והיוסף הזה, התם, נזקק לבור נוסף, ולגברים האסורים, בכדי לדעת איך באמת נראה אדם שבא בחלומו המוות. What I love about this poem is not only does it hint that Rachel is always on his mind, but it also tells you that the death of Rachel is behind everything that happens in this family. The favoritism, the hatred of her children, that she's always there. So of course she's in the dream. So today, thanks to Fern, I heard a great shir by Rebbetzin Gila Rosen, and I learned that for years and years I've been teaching my kids what might be the wrong translation of the word nitzav, which I've been teaching, people generally say means stand up strong. And it happens to be that that word connects Yosef's dreams in this week's parsha, so I couldn't pass up mentioning it. The ladder in Yosef's dream of this week's parsha, it says, "V'hinei sulam mutzav artza v'rosho magia hashamayma." I would have said a ladder is standing firm on the ground and its head reaches the sky. She says nitzav means stand ready, and she brings other psukim to make a great case. If she's right, which I think she is, then if you look at the first dream, he says, Kama alumati v'gam nitzava. So I've always translating that my sheaf arose and stood firmly. She says the right way to look at it is, my sheaf arose and stood ready for what would come. And that's a whole different way of seeing dreams, and that they come, in a way, come back to the first dream at the end, makes sense. And it's a way of understanding, what does it mean to know and understand? So I think it means to get what you get now and stand ready to appreciate it more. Yosef tells Paro he needs an ish navon v'chacham, a smart and wise, clever and smart, two words that mean smart man. And Paro says, you're an ish navon v'chacham, I appoint you. And it's occurred to me that in this text, navon v'chacham may be two ways of understanding the world, and that they may be the difference between liftor and lahakir. Liftor, to explain or interpret, like explaining the dreams, and lahakir, all these examples that we had. And I think Yosef says to the men in jail with him, halol elokim pitronim, that pitrono, that kind of recognition, understanding, interpretation comes from God. And that Yosef was a man who had both. He was navon v'chacham. He had the understanding from Hashem, by which I don't mean aptitude. I mean the actual answer, the message, right? What Torah is for us. And he was capable of hakara, as all people are, but he was at an exceptionally high level, sort of learning from the reality around him and recognizing things. And I'm sorry I talked so much, but I hope you'll stay a few minutes and share your ideas. And have a happy Thanksgiving. We'll
Thank
have
you.
to be like the sheep, stand there and wait to survive this lonely Thanksgiving.
Yes.
Who wants to say something, please? Andrea, you can't fail us now. Okay. Thank you for coming. And
Thank you, Rachel, as always.
I don't know
Wonderful.
if one says
I want to say one thing.
Sure.
Oh, yay.
Yeah, you said something about when the brothers found the Ketona Pasim. They don't tell their father that they saw Yosef at all. They just say, we found the Ketona.
I know, but why say that we found the Ketona? Why not just come home and there's no Yosef? Or don't even ever come home again?
But it kind of gives him some closure. Otherwise,
Right.
You
Yeah.
mean you're saying it's a generous act to bring him?
no, I'm not saying it's a
No.
generous
No.
act, but I am saying they didn't see him necessarily. They just found the Ketona and brought it to their father.
Right, that's their cover story, but why go in that direction? We're so used to hearing that, but if you were the criminal and no one knew what you did, would you take evidence back?
You might.
Well,
You
you
might.
Good
As a
criminal all
cover.
of them.
And they
Might
might,
as a cover.
you know, if you
Right.
want to find something l'kav zchut, you might want to say, maybe they thought it would give him closure,
Right, that's right.
that he could mourn.
Yeah,
If you're looking for something good to say about them.
right, that's true. Which Rashi, of course, always does, not only.
Right.
Rashi's always looking for the good in the brothers and the bad in Yosef.
Yeah.
Because he also
Right.
always comments based on how the story will unfold. So in the end, they're going to get the tribes, so they have to have been seeds of the good. And in the end, he's going to get all sorts of punishments. And if they were just, they have to have been seeds of the bad.
Yeah.
And maybe it felt like a little bit of truth.
A little bit of truth, that's true. There is, that's a good point. There is a need for a little bit of truth.
Yeah.
Thank
I guess
you.
there's a lot to be said for committing crimes, you know, right out in the open.
Yeah, that's what you advocate?
No, I don't, but people do.
They certainly do. Okay, good night,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Good night. Have a
Thanksgiving.
happy
Night, thank
Thanksgiving,
Thanks
one and
for
all.
coming.
You too.
Good
And
night.
give
Thank
thanks.
Thank you.
We'll see you next week.
Thank you.
Thank you.